I just wanted to bring it into CERN, the particle accelerator in Switzerland. Like, that this is the home of the problem, because it's like this core framework that they attach themselves to now, and everything else descends from that now. And that's been one of the biggest mistakes mankind's ever done, I think.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you look at, they made an announcement last July, CERN, that they had discovered a subatomic particle which was consistent with the Higgs boson particle. That is the smallest particle that they've been looking for so far, which would put all their glue together because they can't find it. But just in July last year, they made a big announcement on all the news shows. Scientists at the nuclear establishment in Switzerland discover a particle consistent with the Higgs boson particle. Well, that doesn't mean anything.
No, that's not proof, is it?
It's not. All it means is that it does not disprove what they've been talking about, but neither does it prove it.
But that's supposed to be that's a good point there, Maurice, because the scientific process says that you're supposed to reproduce the experiment twice, at least twice, to prove that something is true. Yeah? So they've only said that they've found it's consistent on one occasion, yeah? So, but
no. They found it with using probability. That they're persuaded it's a small particle.
Okay, so but their own scientific hypothesis, they're not even proving anything.
No, they're not proving anything. As I said tomorrow, they're actually manufacturing these bits. But then they went on in this statement to say, this is the best possible evidence yet for the existence of the Higgs boson particle. Within 8 hours, the BBC and Sky News announced scientists have discovered the smallest particle in the world, the Higgs boson particle that they've been looking for.
Sure.
Which was not true. I can't say it was a lie, but what it means is that these physicists have been aided and abetted by the media into misleading the public.
They're victims of their own environment, I think, Maurice. The physicists on the ground are involved, and I don't think they know any better, to be honest.
Well, they do, because this had to be deliberate. The choice of the words betray their deceit and disingenuous intent. Right. The fact that they use consistent, you wouldn't use that. You'd say, we believe we have found the particle.
Yes.
You don't say it was consistent with. You don't say, this is the best possible evidence yet. And then at Christmas, in the New Year's Honours List, you don't give the guy who made all this fairy story up a Queen's Award in the New Year's Honours List.
Yeah, it's like specifically politically correct way of saying it. It's like a litigation statement almost.
It's legal nonsense.
Legal nonsense. And that's another thing. The media kind of concentrated on the guy Higgs himself and the emotional attachment that he had to ever finding the particle.
Yeah, well, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely bizarre. The whole episode is bizarre. Now, they can't come out. All they want to do is delay things. They spent $5 billion on this particle accelerator, which has been up and running for 4 years. They had a fire, it blew up, so it's actually only been operating about 2.5. They shut it down 3 days ago for 2 years to modify it. So the CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, was shut down. This was announced on the news on Friday, I think it was, by Al Jazeera TV. I didn't hear it on the BBC or Sky, but they shut it down for 2 years to double the voltage so that they can smash the particles together twice as hard. Now, what this means is, in 2 years' time, most of them, or several of them, will have retired. That's all they care about, because in 2 years' time, they'll fob us all off with an excuse that since they made the announcement that they would reopen in 2015, they ran out of money, and now it's going to take till 2018. So that will stall for another 3 years. And then when somebody says, you lied to us, you said you'd found the Higgs boson, they say, no, we didn't. What we said, it was consistent with the Higgs boson, and it was the best possible evidence yet. Your complaint is against the BBC and Sky News. It's nothing to do with us.
They're covered anyway, aren't they?
They're covered. This is how they do it. They drag other people into their web of deceit.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. There's so much money tied up in it, isn't it? It's like It's a money game. It's like
That's all it is.
it always heads back to money at the end of the day, I think.
It is.
Okay, Maurice, tell me about Velikovsky, because it's something I actually just did a show about Velikovsky, and I haven't done much on Velikovsky and his original research, but I think he would draw upon some of his ideas. He didn't have the science with him at the day. He didn't have what we have nowadays, Maurice. He didn't have the scientific concepts to draw upon, and
that's exactly right.
I think
he was one of the greatest. He was one of the greatest scientists of our day.
I'm beginning to think so, Maurice. I'm beginning to think that, and I'm going to devote a bit of time to read some of Velikovsky's work. And it's a shame I haven't done it, because I've come across them on a couple of occasions. But
yes, well, I've got several of his books, and they're excellent. And as you say, he didn't have what we had. If he had been born 30 years later, he would have written Future Science, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And he raised, as I say, the question of why are the oceans salty, and which makes you think. And I've had my own thoughts about that and lots of other questions. But he was a thorn in the side of orthodox science, and he said they were a bunch of imbeciles. And he said they were all wrong, but of course he couldn't show what was right, because it was only in 1960. Now, in all fairness, there was a time during the history of the particle accelerator when it was actually useful, and that was at the time when they were smashing neutrons together. And in 1960, when they smashed the neutron together, they discovered it was made up of a positive particle, a negative particle, and the neutral particle, all glued together. When they discovered that, it was useful information. But what they failed to do is to capitalize upon that information and redesign the atom and redesign physics. What they did, they ignored the discovery. They said, because it's neutral, it doesn't matter anyway. Still neutral. Well, that was one of the biggest mistakes physics ever made. Now, the case for particle accelerators, I believe, has had its day now. That in the 1960s, it was important. They made one discovery, which is incredible, because without that, I couldn't have written Future Science. So I'm not saying everything's wrong. What was wrong about when these characters make a discovery, they hate each other. It's not just that they hate people like me. They bury the discovery because they all want the same kudos. They all want patting on the back. They all want they're all vainglorious, egotistical kinds of people who want to be famous. I don't want to be famous.
Yeah, I think in the particle accelerator too, set the physics out of it. I think the concerted effort by the engineers to get together and design something very complex was good.
Well, I've got to think about engineers and physicists. An engineer is an applied physicist. That's what an engineer is. He puts physics into operation to create technology. Physicists don't do anything. They just argue and stab each other in the back, and everybody else who comes up with the better ideas.
That's funny, Maurice, because I had an argument with a physicist one day, because I've done an engineering degree first, electrical, and I got into physics. I dabbled in physics. I've done a physics degree. It's an academic degree, but and he said to me, he kind of just jokingly said to me, he was jesting at me, but he was trying to be smart, and a lot of physicists do this to engineers, and it's a slogan they use, and they go, engineers build the world and physicists explain the world. And I went, no, you don't. You only think you do, like. And that was my retort, and that cut him up, like. He says, you only think you do, like. Because he says, you only regurgitate what other physicists have done before you. He says, you don't explain anything about the world, like. But that's the mindset that they have. They do actually think that they explain the world.
In fact, it's interesting you should say that, James, because I have my own take on that. Engineers build the world, women fill it with people.
Nice. That's a good little addition to that. I like that, Maurice. Yeah. I do actually. I have a lady coming on, and she's going to talk about the evolution of the female consciousness and through history, and I'm really looking forward to that show because it's something new for me. Like, tell me about Velikovsky's Ice Age mechanism, because this is something I wanted to ask you about, Maurice. He tapped into. What made Velikovsky address these issues? Because he was from an unusual background. He
was. Basically, he had a lot of common sense, and he was aware of the fact that frozen mammoths, that they were a bit like early elephants, hairy elephants with tusks. Frozen mammoths have been found in northern Russia, in Siberia, in the Arctic Circle. buried underground and frozen for thousands and thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. And when they've dug them up, they've found buttercups between their teeth and grass in their stomachs. But buttercups and grass don't grow in that area of the world. And so he said, well, how could they have frozen instantly and been buried? He didn't understand it. And he said, how come palm tree fossils have been found under the snow in Spitsbergen in the Arctic Circle? And how come, well, there's no daylight for palm trees. He said, how come we believe from satellite imaging and so on, that there are coal deposits in the Antarctic where no trees have grown because they are under ice. And he sat down and he thought about this, and he said it must be that sometime during the history of the Earth must have tilted on its axis. The North Poles became the equator, and the equator became the North Pole, and that would explain it. Now, of course, he was ridiculed because he tried to explain then, he went one step too far, and he tried to explain how this pole tilting may have happened. He said, well, I'm not sure, but what if, and he wasn't a what if scientist, but he said, look, what if a planet like Jupiter threw off a piece of rock and it zoomed across the solar system towards the sun, and on the way past, it toppled the Earth off its axis. Maybe that's what happened. So he was ridiculed because they said, well, chunks of rock don't fly off Jupiter. It doesn't work that way. Gravity means that rocks are attracted to Jupiter because Jupiter is the largest planet in this area. It wouldn't go away from Jupiter. And they said, later, this came in the 60s when still people supported him, and they'd done ice core samples from the poles. And the ice core samples that go down 40 feet or whatever show the layers of snow over millions of years. And they show that the polar caps on Earth are millions of years old. Well, if they're millions of years old, they conjecture, then the Earth could never have tilted on its axis because they would have melted when it tilted, and new poles would have formed, which were young poles, not old ones. So they dismissed Velikovsky's ideas. Now, of course, Velikovsky was right. What I show in Future Science, what Velikovsky says was, it gets even more interesting because it says, well, you know, if you think about it, it's impossible to have an ice age on Earth. And they said, you're mad. We know we have ice ages because we know from fossils that the ice caps have advanced and retreated every hundreds of thousands of years, not periodically, but millions and thousands of years. So we know we've had ice ages. But he said, no, theoretically we can't have an ice age, just like theoretically the bumblebee can't fly because its mass is too big to overcome the gravity of its weight. He said, let me explain. He said, let's say that temperatures get colder for some reason. Then what happens is less water evaporates from the ocean, and glaciers, that is, the growth of the polar caps, which is ice and snow, are made of ice and snow. And the ice and snow comes from clouds. And the clouds come from evaporation of the ocean's water. But if the temperatures go colder, you can only ever have less evaporation, less clouds, less snow and ice, so the polar caps can't grow if it gets colder. Now, if we look at it when it gets hotter, then polar caps melt. So you can't have ice ages. But he said, it's obvious we've had ice ages because the geological evidence shows we've had ice ages. He said, and this is what I think happens, he said the only way we can get ice ages is for the Earth to heat up from the middle first. The middle would heat the oceans would boil, giving off more steam. The steam would condense during normal temperatures. The condensing steam would turn into more ice and snow during normal times, and the ice caps would grow. And what I've said in Future Science, I've taken it a step further, I've said that this heating of the inner Earth is caused by gravity waves. Now, as the Earth gets hotter and hotter, the inside of the Earth melts, and the core is molten, then the slush, the snow on the bottom of the caps starts to melt, and we get slush. Maybe 1 or 2 feet of slush compressed between the Earth and the glacier itself. And then what happens is the sun changes its magnetic field after 3,740 years. The Earth tilts on its axis, but the polar caps stay behind in their position with respect to space. It's a bit like pulling a tablecloth from underneath a set table. All the knives and forks stay in the same place. But if you pull the cloth quick enough, nothing moves, and even the water jug will stay on the table. We've all seen the demonstration by magicians and people like that. So what happens is the velocity of the tilt is so great and so swift, it happens instantaneously with such inertia that the caps are left behind. That causes tidal waves, which sweeps across continents and oceans. All the mammoths are swept up and get dumped into ravines and low-lying areas. Then they're covered up with mud and muck, and they're buried for millions of years with buttercups in their teeth and undigested grass in their stomachs. And so what we see is that Velikovsky was right, but he didn't have the information I had to explain it.
Sure. And that's what you do in future science, Maurice. You provide the mechanism now for that, and it's so nice to see that, because I was aware of Velikovsky's ideas. I didn't know they were actually Velikovsky's, because I had read a book called The Path to the Pole by Charles Hapgood, and I think Charles Hapgood was drawing on Velikovsky's work. But I didn't. It's not that I didn't know. I don't think I knew it was Velikovsky's original idea at the time. I had been researching ancient maps and stuff like that, and that's why I got onto Charles Hapgood.
It's a very good book. Yeah, I've read it, and it's very good. It gives you Pole Shift, it's called, the one I read anyway.
Yeah, I think he's got a couple on it, and and it's got a foreword by Albert Einstein as well, because Albert Einstein had endorsed it, and he was pally with Velikovsky, wasn't he?
Yes, I think he had an open mind. You see, you've got to realize, most people don't realize that although Einstein didn't understand, although Newton didn't understand how gravity works, and this is what I was going to mention earlier. A lot of people have been reincarnated before, and they bring these sanskaras with them into the world, these energy patterns. Now, what it means is a human being is still a human being. You say, well, how can we carry information in our body, our soul? How can our soul carry information from one incarnation to another? And I liken it to making a loaf. You can make a loaf of bread, and you can slice it. Now, you can make a loaf into the shape of a letter A. You can make a loaf into the shape of a letter B. You can make a loaf into the shape of a letter C. Now, those loaves carry information, but they're still made with flour, water, and yeast. It's still the same loaf, but they carry information. And the soul carries information in sanskaras from one reincarnation to another. And this is what I believe about Einstein. He was born previously in somewhere like Atlantis, which was fabled to have existed about 20,000 years ago, or 15,000, depending who you want to take, whose figures you want to take. Now, Einstein knew that there's 2 types of gravity. I call them gravity and Itivag. Gravity comes towards us, Itivag energy moves away from us. And it's very, very simple once you understand how it works.
I'm glad you pronounced that for me, because I was going to ask you about Itivag. I didn't know how to pronounce the word.
Well, of course, I had to make the word up. It's just gravity backwards.
Right. Oh, well, sorry. Is that where you get it from? Oh,
that's where I get it from. It's simply because it's gravity going away from you instead of gravity coming towards you. Ah, okay. Now, Einstein knew that gravity was relative to the observer from his previous life in Atlantis. This is what I believe. Now, when he was born, his sanskaras were nagging away at him, saying, gravity is relative, gravity is relative. So he sat down and he thought about this, and he came up with a theory of relativity, in which he tried to describe gravity, but failed hopelessly. Okay, now this is what happens very often. I've come across lots of people, and I liken it to a blind man in a room with an elephant, or 3 blind men in a room with an elephant. One touches the tail, and he says, I've found a whip. Another one touches the leg and says, I found a tree trunk. And the other one touches the ear and says, I found a blanket. And none of them can see the whole picture. And this is what happens when the sanskaras come back, but they're not complete. There's bits missing. So we have to be very careful. There's so many of these so-called researchers who do have something to offer, but they've only got half the picture. And I believe it's because most of them are missing the spiritual side. And most of them don't understand how to mobilize God inside us to get our brains to understand the information that we're taking in. Because once we can get God to do the work, we can just have a good night's sleep.
Maurice, I just got a quick question for you. What's your philosophy on the ego? Is the ego this kind of like operating system we're born with to get us through our early years until we develop spiritually? Is that?
No. It's all to do with this mechanism of getting to heaven. All of these ideas, all of these feelings that we describe, like guilt and jealousy, all of these things are mechanisms. We're in hell. We are in hell. But if we were in heaven, all the physicists would walk down the street of London carrying me on their shoulder. But it's not heaven. It's hell. So it's never going to happen.
The ego's not a good thing then. It's a shackle. It's like a...
Well, it's not that. It's a question of when you're in hell, it's no good making hell a better hell. It's no good trying to make the world a better place. I tried that for 30 years of my life. All you finish up with is a better hell. What you've got to do is escape and not come back. You escape from hell. This is planet prison. We've got to escape from it. And this is why we have all of these so-called feelings and the memory. You know, it's like, why do we have the stars and the planets? Because we can't travel faster than the speed of light. I've explained this in the book, and it's got nothing to do with Einstein's relativity. So if we can't travel faster than the speed of light, why did God make the stars? All we have to do, if you want to understand anything, is put yourself in God's shoes and ask yourself the question. Now, of course, once the body is dead, the soul is released. The soul can then move at the speed of light, which is 300 times 10 to the 6 meters per second, because it's light. It can go anywhere. So the soul can go to another planet or to another solar system or another galaxy and reincarnate. The soul doesn't have to reincarnate on Earth. And this is what's fascinating. And as I say, if you can sit down and ask yourself all sorts of questions about, why do we fall in love? What is love? Well, of course, there are various types of love. The love that Jesus spoke of, love for a fellow man or another living thing, is a sincere and genuine wish for the well-being of another living thing. Now, it's not the love of boyfriend-girlfriends. It's not the love of aficionados, because that is an emotional attachment. It is madness. It is hormone-induced insanity. So you say, well, why would God want to make us become insane periodically? Because God wants to grow. As I mentioned earlier, the only way to grow is to make people have babies. But nobody in their right mind would bring a baby into hell. So he makes people go mad. We call it falling in love. Now, when we fall in love, we think, darling, you're beautiful, you're wonderful. The only thing better than you is more you. This is what God says, because he made us in his own image. So you say, let's have another one just like you. And they think that they're having a baby which is just like them, when of course that baby may have been a tiger in its last life. It's got nothing to do with them. It's all illusion. But of course, the body is very clever. The body heals itself of anything. It tells us in the Bible, if you're ill, God will come to your rescue inside you. God is inside you. He will repair your body. He will heal you of anything. And then love, falling in love, falls by the wayside, and you become sane again. But by that time, you've got 3 kids. And this is how it works. So if you ask yourself, why would God want people to be crazy? It's because he wants people to have babies. And nobody, we think we're intelligent human beings. But as I said, no intelligent person would bring a child into this world. And of course, the ancients used to marry their sister. the Egyptians and the Incas. And the reason they married their sister was because they know they reincarnated into the same DNA. That is, if they came back at anywhere near the same voltage. Clearly, if they came back as a slug, it's because their voltage has really gone down in their lifetime. But if they were more or less the same voltage, then they would come back to the same DNA, and they would be a pharaoh or an Inca king in their next life, and they'd have a better chance of getting to heaven. So they always married their sister. Clearly, if you've got no kids, you've got nobody to come back to, unless you've been really bad and you come back as a slug or something.
Fascinating, Maurice. Fascinating. It's such a new, radical, fresh and welcome mindset and research you've brought through in the book, Maurice. It's been a welcomed read. It really has,
I'd just like to say, James, just one other thing. Some people say that Catholics do not believe in reincarnation. And let me say that this is not true. And the way I can explain this is because what I show in the book is that the earth is hell. Now, once you've taken that on board, now we examine the Bible. The Bible says if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. What I'm saying is if you're bad, you come back to earth, which is hell. So it's only our description of what hell is that varies. Catholics still believe that if you're bad, you go to hell, which is, this is hell. And it's like if you have a little toy, like a little drummer boy playing the drums, a little monkey playing the drums. If you put the battery into the toy, the monkey comes alive and starts hitting the drums. If you take the battery out of the toy, then we say he's dead, the monkey's dead. But you put the battery back in the toy, he starts playing the drums again. We take the battery out and we say he's dead. Now that's the same as a human being. We put God into the human being when he's in the womb. He lives for 70 years. But when you take God away from the human being, we say the body is dead. It won't move anymore because it's lost its voltage. It's lost its soul. The soul goes on to the next step of its journey.
I think that's one of the concepts that I kind of appeals to me so much that you talk about is the voltage of the soul, the bioelectrics. I mean, you always think in terms of electricity or electromagnetic waves. God is light and light is electromagnetic energy, It is a simple process, and us humans complicate it, Maurice,
And of course it explains all of the beliefs about reincarnation, that good people come back as bad people come back as good people, rich people come back as poor people. There's an inverse mechanism to the transmigration of the soul. So this is what the Bible says, the first will be last and the last will be first. And if you want to go to heaven, you've got to give all your money away. This is why
all religions have this reincarnation hypothesis, if you want to call it that. Forgive me.
All of them subscribe to it. And all of the religions are the same. As I was pointing out earlier, Krishna is the same as Tutankhamun, who is the same as the king of Hotzdorf, who is the same as Buddha, who is the same as Jesus, who is the same as Lord Paikal of the Mayas, who is the same as Viracochas of Peru. These are all the same reincarnation. Over and over again, God comes down to earth, and he teaches us what's right and what's wrong, morality, ethics. And he sets down this knowledge so that those who are really intent on finding it will find it. But he decodes it because he doesn't want the wrong people going to heaven. So he has to encode it, not just to survive catastrophe cycles and wars and weather and things like that, but also because he doesn't want bad people figuring this stuff out and going to heaven, because that's not allowed in this scheme. Bad people come back again and live over and over again for thousands and thousands of years.
Sure. I'm just thinking about Akhenaten there on, he brought in this, he was the heretic, that brought in the sun worshipping single world atheist religion,
Well, he wasn't. I mean,
he wasn't, but that's what they portray him as.
That's right. Tutankhamun was the son of God, and Akhenaten was not, as they suggest, his father. We're told, if you decode the tomb effects of Tutankhamun, we're told that Akhenaten could not have been his father. He was more of a guardian. He was the forerunner of Tutankhamun, a bit like John the Baptist, who, one wonders if Jesus knew he was Jesus.
They try to sell that hypothesis, don't they? They really try to push that he is the son of Akhenaten.
Well, no, when I say that, I mean, did Jesus know who he was? Maybe it wasn't until he met John the Baptist, and John the Baptist says, "You are Jesus, you're the guy." And he must have said, "Am I?" Until that point, because that's when his life changed. It was at that point his life changed. Maybe it was so obvious he never thought about it. It's like me when I've said, oh, when is somebody going to figure out how astrology works? When is somebody going to figure out how gravity works? When is somebody going to figure out why the Earth is boiling hot in the middle? And it always fell down to me. I was the guy who had to do it.
Sure. You know, the funny thing is, Maurice, you know, I was, you know, I was building we're such a similar background. I was building radio transmitters as a kid. It was a hobby I had, and I had my first radio station when I was 10. I was telling you that last time we spoke. But, you know, I was also on oil rigs working, and I was cocooned on this oil rig, and I used to study the astrology of the people, and that's where I kind of got my appreciation for astrology as a psychology, as a mechanism to understand people, because I've seen people playing off each other in this weird little cocoon I was in, this rig, and, you know, I just wanted to understand it, like, and I didn't have the mechanism, like, you know, and I like what you do with the astrogenetics and the sun, because it's so much sense, you know, this other astrology that I'm taught makes some sort of sense, but the mechanism's not really there to explain it, and I think that's what you really hit home. You nail it really 100%, like.
Absolutely. And of course, the moment of conception is 9 months away from the moment of birth. And some astrologers look at the moment of birth rather than conception. And therefore, they don't agree with my work because they don't want to be out of a job. They don't want to be on a dole. But what I've shown is that it's like being on a train. You can be on the first carriage or the ninth carriage, but the journey is the same. And so it doesn't matter which carriage you look into. And that's the thing about astrology. The sun's radiation repeats on the 9th month is the same as the first month. And that's why everything appears to be the same.
Yeah, there's a good reason for that, like. Yeah. I mean, you could be arguing over details, exactly, Maurice, like. You know, the carriage 1 or carriage 9 don't matter, like. You're on that train anyway, like. But, Maurice, if I don't ask you about the amazing lid of Blanquet, I'll go insane, because when I was in my mid-teens, I picked up the Mayan prophecies. Probably would have been 16, 17, I think, and it was my first alternative history book, if you want to call it that. And it was the one key thing that got me was the number system on the lid of Blanquet. And I remember I was going out with a girl one time, and I was in the British Museum, and we were touring around. I'd lived in London for a while, and they have a replica of the lid of Palenque on the wall on the back staircase, and I was walking up, and I was just thinking about this today before the show, and I was like, I was standing there, and I was telling her about the lid of Palenque and the number system that I had read about it when I was a youngster, and in this book, The Mayan Prophecies, and I just knew it as the lid of Palenque once I saw it, and this other couple had been standing near us listening to me talking, and then I go, really? And they just started asking me questions about it. And I was just recalling this today, and then they were asking me all these really deep questions, and I just was regurgitating some facts from the Mayan prophecies and the number system, and how weird that this ancient civilization knew about it. And then, but that's the time I started telling them that, and other people started listening. And I had a group standing around me, and I had to walk away because they thought I was some tour guide doing some tour of the British Museum. But
I've given lectures to thousands of people, and they're all interested. They're glued to their seats, and they all want a book afterwards. But see, their eyes open once you start explaining all this stuff to them, and you explain how they can be happy, how they can find happiness, and what life's all about. You know, the women are interested in the fertility aspects and the babies and things like that. You know, the men want to travel faster than light and things like that. And there's something in it for everybody. My audience has ranged from kids age 14 to old people age 90. You know, I used to do quite a few at the Daphne du Maurier Festival, quite a few lectures there when books came out. Quite some time ago now, in the 2001, 2, 3, and so on. And the people, they would come up to me afterwards and say, but I never realised that the book was about this sort of stuff. I gave a lecture in Waterstones in Plymouth once, and a lady came up to me. Oh, it's the lady who worked there, actually. She said, we've been selling this book for the last 2 weeks. And I didn't know it had anything to do with women or fertility or love or anything. I thought it was all about science.
I used to live in Plymouth, Maurice.
Did you?
Yeah, I spent about 4 or 5 years there. But for my sins, I used to say to people, but I actually quite enjoyed it because I used to get on the ferry and go to Brittany and escape as well. Like I didn't mind Plymouth. I lived in Cornwall too, like, but beautiful part of the world. Like.
Yes, I lived in Saltash in Cornwall for 25 years.
In Saltash?
Yeah.
Really? In Cornwall? Yeah. Just over the bridge?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lovely part of the world, like, definitely is. Like. Yeah, I made it down to Penzance for a while, but I had to get out of there because I wanted to go and explore some of the world, and I was never going to do it in Penzance. It was a lovely place, like, but
I suspect we were both there at the same time.
We probably were. I'm trying to think when that would be. I would have been probably about 10 years ago, I'd imagine. Yes,
I left 10 years ago.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Strange, that, isn't it?
2002. And that's when I saw my first reincarnation. It was an aunt of mine, age 69, had died.
Right.
And on the same day, her grandson's wife had given birth to a baby, and the coffin was next to the wall where the baby was sitting, and the soul reincarnated from the old lady into the baby.
No way.
It's fascinating. Absolutely. It was a curious experience, and my wife was there, and she'll testify to the evidence that goes with it. It's a long story, but it just didn't involve that. There was lots of things that happened around that time, leading up to the funeral and after the funeral. You don't see it, you witness it. And that's something I can't describe.
Yes, I know what you mean. It's more of a... I know what you mean by that. It's like...
I didn't know I'd witnessed it until 3 days later. I'd had 2 nights where I couldn't sleep once I'd got back home to Saltash.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to the wife, it suddenly clicked, the penny dropped. And I said, I know what's happened. Let's look at all of the information. And we put all of the information together of the past few days. And I said, she's reincarnated into the baby. Because she'd come straight from the hospital. The baby was 2 hours old. It'd just been born.
Fascinating.
And the pregnant mother had been next to the aunt. The pregnant mother had been next to the aunt when she was dying. So the soul was being transferred from the aunt into the baby in accordance with the laws of charging a capacitor.
Yeah.
In other words, it took 5 days to reach 62% of its charge.
Mm-hmm.
The soul was moving over from the old lady into the baby from a week before, and then after a week the old lady died, and the last third of the voltage was transferred during that day of the funeral when I was there.
Fascinating.
There's no question.
You know, you see, that's the thing, Maurice. You were saying everybody gets a little bit out of your work, you know, and you have this wonderful mix of science, art, humanity, spirituality, philosophy, you know, and that's a good quality, Maurice, that not many people have, I suppose, like in terms of science. Like, you know, some people just concentrate on science, and some people concentrate on history, some people concentrate on spirituality, like, but there's a lovely woven mix of ideas in there, you know, and I think that's where we need to go as a civilization. I think that's where people need to concentrate, and your work does do that, Maurice, you know, and I guess my route into it was the historical mysteries when I was a teenager, like, you know, and I have developed a spirituality over the years, like, and I am seeking out that consciousness more.
Well, I'll be honest, although I was always interested in this stuff, no question about it, I actually switched on at the age of 36.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's when I switched on. And I suspect most people during the third 12-year cycle are the same.
Yeah.
No matter what you are, you'll let things go for 36 years, but at the age of 36, you'll say, it's down to me to do something about it.
It's funny, it's because I'm 37 this year, Maurice, and it's just probably the lights really has gone on for me last year, like, yeah.
And it's only when the light goes on you can see what's in the room.
Yeah.
So for the first 36 years, we walk around in the darkness.
If you had asked me about 10 years ago, was I switched on, I would have said, yeah, but I wasn't, like, I thought
exactly.
I was.
Exactly. You think you are.
I went from not being switched on to thinking I was switched on to being switched on. So
exactly.
It was like a jump, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And I kind of look back at the last 10 years now, and I go, like, well, okay, yeah, I was getting there. I was seeking, like, but I wasn't, like, you know. And, but it's fascinating, like, it really is, like. Maurice, give us out your website, because I'm going to wrap it up there. I could talk forever. Fascinating stuff. But
it's www.mauricecotterill.com.
Sure. And you've got some wonderful papers that you can download there as well, and all your books as well.
That's right, for free.
Yeah. Yeah, so just on the lid of Palenque, I just wanted to say, you go into that in the book and you have a lovely overview of some other work that you have in future science. And I think one of the most key things, because it's very hard to explain this, and obviously you would need the book and you need to see the artwork to explain the lid of Palenque. But the missing corners, Maurice, this is the thing that sold it for me. That must have been like a beacon to you when you seen that, and when you copped on.
Absolutely. But let me tell you something. I've learned that you're not allowed into the tomb anymore in Palenque.
Really?
That's right. They've closed it off so people can't get in. They've got a new museum on the site which has a replica tomb. And the tomb lid, the lid of Palenque in the museum, has the corners attached.
Really?
So nobody can, they've actually put corners on the lid, so nobody now can ever decode that lid.
Is there a sinister plot to that, or?
I don't know.
That's strange. What did they just square the corners off to make it look more?
They must have thought they were damaged, and they completed the corners, and without knowing that with the corners you could decode it.
Sure.
Well, that's most unscientific, of course.
Obviously, not going to give the stuff away in the book because you need to see the art as well, Maurice. But just for the listeners, I just wanted to say, when you take these missing corners and you fabricate them again, and you make them up, you can decode some images. Basically, I'm just giving a general overview here, but you get this kind of resounding check that you're on the right path because there's defects with the banana on the nose, on the glyph, and when you put these two images together, you get more images, and there's a decoding process going on, but you have artifacts that back up the decoding process.
Absolutely.
They
wouldn't let it be ambiguous. They would not allow any ambiguity at all in the decoding process. So every picture appears in three different forms.
That's what I wanted to get at. Yeah, there's no ambiguity there. You can't say that's a bit reaching, or it's not like that at all. It's just this decoding process just keeps going and going, and it's nice to have the artifacts there. That appeals to me, Maurice, I guess.
Yes, it's wonderful. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful when you see it,
It's a living miracle.
Very much so, Maurice. Very much so. Well, look, Maurice, I really thank you for your books. I mean, you really have gone and provided a wealth, and I'm glad you did it because, as you just told me, they've closed off the lid of Palenque. If you hadn't have done that, I mean, who would have, Maurice? So
exactly. And it's curious that the tomb was opened in 1952, the year I was born.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. It's somewhere I've never been to Central America. I've been to Egypt on 3 occasions, but I've never been to Central America, and I've always wanted to go, particularly just to see the pyramids and the astronomy. The astronomy would appeal to me, Maurice. But I just wanted to ask you before we go, Maurice, what do you make of ancient Egypt and the Great Pyramids? Have you studied the engineering of the Great Pyramid, or?
I have.
Yeah.
I think Christopher Dunn's book is a very interesting one.
Sure, and I had Chris Dunn on the show, as you know.
Yes, I think it's very sensible, reasonable, rational. I've one or two questions about it, what he's saying, but I think it's one of the best treatises on the pyramids. When I was in Egypt, and this might be true or not, when I tried to inquire how many pyramids in Egypt there were, I was told between either 96 or 97. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but those are both significant numbers in regard to the sunspot cycle.
That's right, yes. The 96 and 97, you told me that. And
now
the Newgrange as well, you were saying.
Yeah, now the pyramid builders, of course, they were like 2300 BC, and Tutankhamun didn't come till about 1315. So there was a flowering in Egypt, and clearly the flowering was caused by godly energy coming down and building the pyramids. And they were depositories of knowledge. There's no question about that. They were saying, look at us, how clever we are. And if you look at the lid of Palenque, the first thing you realize is these people were geniuses and we're imbeciles. So they were trying to tell us that they wanted us to look carefully at the size of the stones, because it would suggest that they had access to anti-gravity and understood physics. They wanted us to understand that they didn't use cement to put the stones together, for example. Hundreds and hundreds of different things, like the giant obelisks and things like that. they left some of them in, not some, one at least, in position, suggesting how they may have quarried the stone and things like that. And it was clearly an educational experience, just like the Mexicans were trying to teach us about everything. The Egyptians were trying to do the same at a different time in history, just as Tutankhamun tried to do, just as the king of Hochstorf, the Celtic leader, tried to do, just as Qin Shi Huangdi in China, the first emperor of the unified China, tried to do. So these are all depositories of knowledge and information.
Sure, and I think what I take away from your work, Maurice, is that I must now think of ancient civilizations many levels of intellect above what I was, because, you know, these guys left us a legacy, and, you know, there is individuals in the history like the specific historical figures and religious figures that you mentioned, but, you know, they encoded this in true art and science, like, and left us resounding evidence to check it and recheck it, and, you know, there's just such a level of intellect there. It's a lot more than what I was thinking. Like, you know, I was thinking into engineering terms, Maurice, and you forgive me for that. Like,
no, I understand, but you see, the archaeologists, when they can't understand something, they clutch at straws and make things up. They say, well, these people didn't have the wheel, therefore they're primitive. But they didn't have the wheel on Star Trek. They beamed each other about the place. And they say these people didn't have mobile phones, therefore they were primitive. But they used ESP, they didn't need telephones. And it's when you start looking at things in a different way, you've got to start dismissing idiotic human beings.
You just mentioned anti-gravity there too. Are you familiar with Coral Castle and Leeds Gallen?
Oh yes, in fact he was very helpful. Ed Leeds Calnin was very helpful to me in my understanding how gravity works.
That's funny, because I was going to ask you about, do you think that your future science could help reverse what Leeds Calnin did? So. Well,
what Leeds Calnin said was, all of the engineers and scientists are wrong. There is no such thing as electrons. It's all about spinning magnets.
Right. Yes, because he talked about this electromagnetic anti-gravity thing, didn't he?
Yeah. He said that electricity was not caused by electrons, it was caused by spinning magnets. Now, I came along, having qualified as an engineer, the background of an engineer, and I said, well, I believe electrons move along a wire because I understand why, but I also understand that Leeds Calnin, this Latvian immigrant into America in the 1920s who built Coral Castle with stones weighing dozens of tons.
He's only a little guy, wasn't he? He's tiny, like you.
A slight guy. He said it looks like he figured out how gravity worked and how anti-gravity worked, but he was so upset at the reception he got, he decided to conceal it and keep it secret. And so he wrote some pamphlets or booklets, which were all in code. And in fact, somebody's written to me and showed me how the code actually works and how you can get more information from it. But apart from the code, he also said that electricity doesn't work by the movement of electrons, it moves by spinning magnets. So my question was, given that I believe he was right and modern engineering is right, in part, how could I reconcile the two? And there was only one way how an electron could become a magnet, and that was if it was coil-shaped. Because if you spin a coil through an electric field, it would become a magnet. It would induce a magnetic field. So it was Leeds Calnin who put me onto it by saying all of engineering was wrong. It's all about magnetism. And of course, what I've shown is it's not all about electricity, and it's not all about magnetism. It's about electricity and magnetism.
Well, that's strange, because when I had been reading future science and I'm looking at this wonderful theory of reversing gravity with I was just automatically thinking of Leeds Gallen, and you know, some people think he was broadcasting some weird frequency around the place and lifting the stones off the ground. I know Chris Dunn's actually going to take on Coral Castle as a project to research and try and unveil some stuff, and he's going to have a look at it. Like, you know, it's just... He
needs to see Future Science, really, but I don't have an address for him.
Yeah. I'll forward him on the details of Future Science and say, look, you know, you might want to take a look at it. I'll certainly contact him anyway.
Sure.
I have him on Skype here, but Yeah, I think he'd be very interested in it. I really, really do. Like, you know, it's just I had actually had a conversation with Chris, and Chris was actually saying to me about there's something like non-linear resonance or something like that. Some sort of a weird frequency that he was possibly using, or he tuned into something. He's definitely using some frequency to reverse the effect of gravity.
Well, you can do. I mean, the hydrogen frequency is gravity frequency, 1.42 gigacycles or gigahertz. So if you just pass that through a phase changer or delay line, then you get the anti-phase of the gravity frequency, and that will decouple hydrogen bonds in hydrogen-containing matter. So if you shine it on water, it will disintegrate the water. If you shine it on a human being, it will disintegrate a human being, because we're mostly water.
You can generate hydrogen that way. This is the other application of this whole process.
Of course, you can make unlimited amounts of hydrogen by shining it onto the water and capturing the hydrogen.
Sure. I think it's only a matter of time, Maurice, before somebody will grab this work and run with it and experiment with it. Or I don't think it will be in any mainstream academic circle. I think it will be on a sideline somewhere. But it's so important, though, Maurice. It definitely is. Like, and as I say, it makes so much more sense. So, like, you know, it's just fascinating read. Like, you know, you really have tackled serious questions, but you know, you've done it in a very logical, systematic way. Like, you know, and it's a pleasure to read. Like, so Maurice, we're going to wrap it up there. We really could talk for hours, like, but I have to wrap it up. And you know, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. You're going to come back on later on in the year, hopefully, and talk about the Celtic Chronicles for me. Is that correct?
It's fine.
Right. Well, it's a pleasure having you, Maurice. Yeah.
Okay, James, you're welcome. Yeah. Statement to say, this is the best possible evidence yet for the existence of the Higgs boson particle. Within 8 hours, the BBC and Sky News announced scientists have discovered the smallest particle in the world, the Higgs boson particle that they've been looking for.
Sure.
Which was not true. I can't say it was a lie,
yeah.
But what it means is that these physicists have been aided and abetted by the media into misleading the public.
They're victims of their own environment, I think, Maurice. The physicists on the ground that are involved, and I don't think they know any better, to be honest.
Well, they do, because this had to be deliberate. The choice of the words betray their deceit and disingenuous intent. Right. The fact that they use consistent. You wouldn't use that. You'd say, we believe we have found the particle.
Yes.
You don't say it was consistent with. You don't say, this is the best possible evidence yet. And then at Christmas, in the New Year's Honours List, you don't give the guy who made all this fairy story up a Queen's Award in the New Year's Honours List.
Yeah, it's like specifically politically correct way of saying it. It's like a litigation statement almost.
It's legal nonsense.
Legal nonsense. You know, and that's another thing. The media kind of concentrated on the guy Higgs himself and the emotional attachment that he had to ever finding the particle.
Yeah, well, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely bizarre. The whole episode is bizarre. Now, they can't come out. All they want to do is delay things. They spent $5 billion on this particle accelerator, which has been up and running for 4 years. They had a fire, it blew up, so it's actually only been operating about 2.5. They shut it down 3 days ago for 2 years to modify it. So the CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, was shut down. This was announced on the news on Friday, I think it was, by Al Jazeera TV. I didn't hear it on the BBC or Sky, but they shut it down for 2 years to double the voltage so that they can smash the particles together twice as hard.
I just wanted to bring it into CERN, the particle accelerator in Switzerland. Like, you know, this is the home of the problem, because it's like this core framework that they attach themselves to now, and everything else descends from that now. And you know, that's been one of the biggest mistakes mankind's ever done, I think. You
Well,
know,
absolutely. I mean, if you look at, they made an announcement last July, CERN, that they had discovered a subatomic particle which was consistent with the Higgs boson particle. That is the smallest particle that they've been looking for so far, which would put all their glue. Now, what this means is, in 2 years' time, they will have, most of them, or several of them will have retired. That's all they care about, because in 2 years' time, they'll fob us all off with an excuse that since they made the announcement that they would reopen in 2015, they ran out of money, and now it's going to take till 2018. So that'll stall for another 3 years. And then when somebody says, you lied to us, you said you'd found the Higgs boson, they say, no, we didn't. What we said, it was consistent with the Higgs boson, and it was the best possible evidence yet. Your complaint is against the BBC and Sky News. It's nothing to do with us.
They're covered anyway, aren't they?
They're covered. This is how they do it. They drag other people into their web of deceit.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. You know, there's so much money tied up in it, isn't it? It's like, it's a money game. It's like,
that's all it is.
It always heads back to money at the end of the day, I think.
It is.
You know, okay, Maurice, you know, tell me about Velikovsky, because it's something
together, because they can't find it. But just in July last year, they made a big announcement on all the news shows. Scientists at the nuclear establishment in Switzerland discover a particle consistent with the Higgs boson particle. Well, that doesn't mean anything.
No, that's not proof, is it?
It's not. All it means is that it does not disprove what they've been talking about, but neither does it prove it.
But that's supposed to be that's a good point there, Maurice, because the scientific process says that you're supposed to reproduce the experiment twice, at least twice, to prove that something is true. Yeah? So they've only said that they've found it's consistent on one occasion, yeah? So, but
no. They found it with using probability. That they're persuaded it's a small particle.
Okay, so but their own scientific hypothesis, they're not even proving anything.
No, they're not proving anything. As I said tomorrow, they're actually manufacturing these bits. But then they went on in this